Tonight we step back from emperors and countesses to examine the quarrel that shaped them all, the Investiture Controversy. A struggle not merely of theology, but of land, labor, and the wealth that flowed from both. For nearly 50 years, Pope and Emperor wrestled over a single question: who appoints the shepherds of Christendom, the throne or the altar? But beneath that question lay deeper tensions: new lands in the east, new wealth in the monasteries, and an empire whose authority was slipping through its fingers. This is the story of how Europe's future was written in charters, not just in snow at Canossa. In the centuries before the controversy, Germany was expanding eastward into lands newly taken from the Slavs. These frontier regions, Meissen, Lusatia, Pomerania, were rich, underpopulated, and ready for transformation. And who transformed them? Not the emperor, but the monasteries. Men like Othman of Passau and Wipprecht of Magdeburg brought settlers, cleared forests, drained marshes, and built villages where none had stood. The Benedictines, and later the Cistercians in reaction to monastic excess, became the great engineers of the frontier. Their estates were efficient, disciplined, and astonishingly productive. This was Henry IV's problem. The wealth of Germany was growing, but it was growing in hands he did not control. Every new grange, every new tithe, every new settlement strengthened the bishops and weakened the crown. The investiture controversy begins here, in the soil itself. Across the empire, the 11th century was an age of rising productivity. Lay lords cleared forests, drained marshes, and founded new villages. Merchants opened markets from the Rhine to the Elbe. Germany was growing in population, in wealth, in ambition. But one part of this new economy grew faster than all the rest: the monastic estates. Cluny, Hirsau, Babenhausen. These were not rustic retreats, but disciplined institutions with written accounts, planned fields, and labor forces that rivaled any noble house. Their granges and vineyards and mills produced wealth on a scale few princes could match. And here lay the emperor's dilemma. Lay prosperity strengthened the crown. Monastic prosperity strengthened the church. In France, the king could harness both. In Germany, half the economic engine lay beyond imperial reach, protected by canon law, papal privilege, and the charisma of reform. The investiture controversy was not only a quarrel over rings and staffs, it was a struggle over who would command the wealth of a rising world. Henry IV's problem was not abstract theology, it was administration. The daily work of holding together a realm that stretched from the North Sea to the Alps. For this he relied on men like Ulrico of Aquileia, a patriarch appointed with imperial backing to guard the eastern Alpine passes. Aquileia was no mere bishopric. It was a fortress of diplomacy and defense. If Henry could not choose its patriarch, he could not secure his own frontier. And in Carinthia he placed Luitpold, a loyal duke installed after the Seringers rebelled. Carinthia was a hinge between Germany and Italy, a land of marches and mountain roads. Without the right to appoint such men, bishops and dukes alike, the emperor's authority would dissolve into the ambitions of local lords. This was the heart of the controversy. Not a quarrel over rings and staffs, but over the machinery of government itself. If Rome claimed the right to appoint bishops, then half the empire's administrators, judges, and frontier commanders would answer to the Pope, not to the crown. Henry IV understood the stakes. Without investiture, he would not merely lose influence, he would lose the empire. Gregory VII did not merely challenge an emperor, he rewrote the rules of Christendom. For centuries, kings and emperors had invested bishops as a matter of course. It was practical, it was customary, and it was never seriously questioned. Then Gregory declared it a sin, a new thing and a bold one. Why? Because the church feared what it had become. Bishoprics were rich, their lands vast, their revenues tempting. Under imperial control, they risked becoming fiefs of ambitious nobles, bought and sold like any other office. Gregory saw simony everywhere, and he was not wrong. But there was more. If Rome controlled investiture, Rome controlled the wealth of the church. And in an age where monasteries and bishoprics were the most productive estates in Europe, that meant controlling an empire's economic heart. The papacy gained not only moral authority, but material power, lands, tithes, and the loyalty of men who owed their office to the Pope alone. Yet Gregory's claim was not without legitimacy. A bishop is a shepherd of souls, not a minister of state. To be appointed by a lay ruler, a warrior king, seemed to many reformers a contradiction. The church sought purity, the emperor sought order, and between these two visions the world was torn. By the 11th century, a bishopric was no longer merely a seat of teaching and sacrament. It was an economic throne. A bishop commanded lands, tithes, tolls, mills, vineyards, and courts. A miniature principality wrapped in vestments. And this wealth invited temptation. If an emperor appointed the bishop, the revenues of the see flowed toward the crown. If the pope appointed him, they flowed toward Rome. Neither side was blind to the opportunity. The church argued, with some justice, that spiritual offices should not be bought, sold, or traded for political favor. Simony was real, and imperial appointments often rewarded loyalty rather than virtue. But the papacy's victory in the controversy brought its own dangers. Rome became the broker of Europe's richest benefices, and the cardinals its shareholders. Future centuries would see the same abuses the reformers feared, only now in papal hands. Yet there was another side to the story. The church alone possessed the schools, the scriptoria, the training to raise men of humble birth into positions of leadership. A bishopric could be a ladder for talent, not merely a prize for nobles. In this sense, the church's control of appointments had a democratizing edge, even as it concentrated wealth on an unprecedented scale. Thus, the controversy was not simply about holiness or greed. It was about who would command the economic heart of medieval Europe, and what kind of men would rise to power within it. The investiture controversy was not fought only in councils and decrees. It was fought in the loyalties of men, bishops, dukes, patriarchs, and princes, each choosing between emperor and pope, often more than once. On the imperial side stood Henry IV and his son Henry V, supported by bishops like Ulrico of Aquileia, Werner of Spoleto, and Rüdiger of Speyer. Men whose sees guarded frontiers, commanded revenues, and upheld the old order of imperial investiture. With them stood secular lords such as Vladislav of Bohemia and Vladislav of Poland, whose crowns depended on imperial favor. Opposing them were Gregory VII and his successors, backed by reformers like Othman of Passau, Anselmo of Lucca, and Bernard of Parma, men who believed the church must be free from the grasp of kings. Alongside them stood Matilda of Tuscany, Wilf IV of Bavaria, and Rudolf of Swabia, whose rebellion nearly unseated Henry IV. But the most revealing figures are those who switched sides: Leopold of Austria, Dagobert of Pisa, and Benno of Osnabrück, men who began as imperial loyalists and ended as champions of reform. Their defections show how the controversy fractured Europe's political map, not along simple lines of piety or ambition, but through the shifting pressures of war, reform, and survival. And in the midst of it all stood mediators like Gerard of York, trying to reconcile two powers that no longer spoke the same political language. This was the human face of controversy. Alliances forged, broken, and reforged. A continent choosing sides in a struggle that would reshape its future. When the dust of the controversy settled, the empire did not return to what it had been. The emperor had lost more than the right to invest bishops. He had lost the architecture of central authority. In the vacuum stepped a new class, the ministeriales, unfree knights, once servants of the crown, now rose as administrators, castellans, and commanders. They managed estates, collected revenues, and governed in the emperor's name, and in time they governed in their own. As bishops gained spiritual independence and princes gained territorial power, the ministeriales became the glue holding the imperial system together. But glue can harden into walls. Their castles became hereditary, their offices permanent, their loyalties local. Germany did not centralize like France, nor unify like England. It fractured into bishoprics, duchies, free cities, and lordships, a mosaic born from the very struggle that was meant to restore order. The investiture controversy ended with a compromise, but the empire it left behind was no longer an empire in the old sense. It was a constellation, brilliant, diverse, and forever divided. When the investiture controversy ended, its echoes did not fade. In Italy, the struggle between Pope and Emperor hardened into two great banners, the Guelphs loyal to the papacy and the Ghibellines loyal to the empire. At first, these names carried real meaning. A Guelph believed the church should be free from imperial interference. The Ghibelline believed the emperor was the rightful guardian of order in Italy. The quarrel of Gregory and Henry lived on in the streets of Milan, Pisa, and Florence. But as the centuries passed, the old ideals thinned. By the 13th century, a city chose its allegiance not by theology, but by rivalry. Florence became Guelph because Siena was Ghibelline. Families took their sides because their neighbors had taken the other. The labels endured, but the beliefs behind them dissolved into the politics of trade, pride, and revenge. Germany followed a different path. There the controversy weakened the emperor, strengthened the princes, and left the land a patchwork of duchies, bishoprics, and free cities. Italy fractured into communes, Germany into principalities. Both inherited the divisions of the investiture controversy, but in Italy the division became a banner, and in Germany a boundary. Thus, the legacy of the controversy was not unity, but identity, shifting, contested, and often arbitrary, yet powerful enough to shape the destinies of cities and kingdoms for centuries. France watched the investiture controversy with great interest and even greater caution. While Germany tore itself apart, the Capetian kings quietly achieved everything Henry IV had fought for, and with scarcely a bruise to show for it. How? Because France had what the empire lacked: a compact royal domain, obedient bishops, and no princely dynasties strong enough to challenge the crown. Where Henry faced dukes and prince bishops with armies, the French king faced cathedral chapters filled with his own clients. And France played its hand shrewdly. In public, the Capetians sided with Rome, denouncing imperial investiture as a scandal. In private, they continued to guide episcopal elections, control church lands, and shape the careers of ambitious clerics. The papacy, locked in struggle with the empire, needed French support, and so it tolerated French practice. Thus, France accepted the theory of papal authority while keeping the substance of royal control. A compromise so slight that only the theologians noticed it, and even they pretended not to mind. Germany fractured, Italy bled, but France emerged with a church that was loyal, wealthy, and effectively national. A quiet victory won not on the battlefield, but in the chancery. The irony is sharp. Henry IV fought Rome and lost. The Capetians flattered Rome and won. In the 8th and ninth centuries, frontier Germany did not have a full economy. It had land, forests, and a handful of ways to turn labor into surplus. Monasteries stepped into that gap. They were not just houses of prayer, they were machineries for continuity. A monastery could outlive every founder, every patron, every abbot. It could keep a grange running for centuries, keep a mill repaired, keep vineyards pruned. That timelessness was its superpower. It gave fragile new industries the one thing they could not give themselves: persistence. By the 12th century, the world had changed. Lay towns, merchants, and lords can now build and sustain their own enterprises. The Concordat of Worms (1122) settled the question of who appointed bishops, but it did not settle who controlled the wealth that bishops and abbots commanded. Even after the compromise, much of Germany's productive land remained locked inside monastic estates designed for stability, not for reinvestment. The empire had peace but not flexibility. In Italy, the story was different. Cities had long since built their own industries. Monastic wealth there flowed less from frontier development and more from Italy's role as the spiritual crossroads of Europe. Pilgrims, relics, courts, and councils. In Germany, every pious donation, every eternal grant of land to a monastery made perfect sense in the ninth century and became a constraint in the 12th. The investiture controversy was not just about who gave the ring and staff, it was about who could unlock a frozen past to fund a moving future. What once made barren acres thrive can bind the hands that keep them alive.